As we come back together, I invite you to find the blue friendship registers and sign your name as it comes down your row. Today, as you know, is the second Sunday of Easter. And even if you didn't know it, well, it's printed at the top of your order of worship. So today also goes by many other names. A few are St. Thomas Sunday, Low Sunday, World Book Day, and my favorite, Quasimodo Sunday. It's the day in worship where we grab the girl, climb up to the belfries, and swing from the steeple. Well, we probably won't do that today, but with me, you never know. But there is a direct connection with that character. The word actually comes from the first two words of the traditional Roman Catholic introit for today in Latin, which starts Quasimodo hinte infantes. I don't know Latin. Translated as newborn babes or almost a newborn babe. And yes, indeed, the principal character from Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame takes his name from this day. In the story, the child was found abandoned on the doorsteps of Notre Dame by the Archdeacon Claude Frollo on the Sunday after Easter, 1467. In the words of the novel, he baptized his adopted child and called him Quasimodo. Whether it was that he chose thereby to commemorate the day that he found him, or that he meant to mark by that name how incomplete and imperfectly molded the poor little creature was. Indeed, Quasimodo, one-eyed, hunchbacked, and bow-legged, could hardly be considered as anything more than an almost. We gather this morning to praise God with flute and oboe and voice and heart. We gather this morning to ask God's wisdom and guidance and intercession. We gather this morning for worship, some of us feeling fully formed, and some of us feeling like an almost. We gather to celebrate the risen Christ. Our gospel reading. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced at what they saw. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was also called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails in my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. These are the scriptures of God for the people of Christ.
May the Spirit grant us understanding.
Since most of my family now lives in Texas, and I graduated from high school and college in Texas, and I've lived over half of my life between the Red River and the Rio Grande, some are surprised to discover that I originally hail from deep in the Missouri Ozarks, Kabul, Missouri specifically, and I've got plenty of Kabul farm stories, but this is not one of them. I mention it because as a native Missourian, it is my birthright to be mule-headed and stubborn. Yes, I have an excuse, as evidenced by the official state animal, the Missouri mule, and our state slogan. The mule, a cross between a female horse and a male donkey, looks a bit like a horse that God had fun with. And there's a reason why people are carried out of the Grand Canyon on mules rather than horses, because they're stronger and smarter than horses. But they're also way more stubborn. Getting a mule to do what you want is the trick. As the old joke goes, of course you can talk softly to a mule. First, whack him in the head with a 2x4, and then whisper in his ear. We Missourians claim our mule-headedness proudly. Just look at our slogan, the Show Me State. As legend goes, in 1899, U.S. Congressman Willard Duncan Vandiver proclaimed in a Washington speech, "I come from a state that raises corn and cotton and cockaburs and Democrats, and frothy eloquence neither convinces nor satisfies me. I am from Missouri. You have got to show me." Another slogan story hits closer to home for me. You see, my grandfather and other family members worked in the Joplin, Missouri coal mines. Legend has it that when coal miners in Leadville, Colorado went on strike in the 1890s, miners from Joplin were imported to replace them. The Joplin workers were unfamiliar with Colorado mining techniques, so they required frequent instruction. The pit bosses began saying, "That man is from Missouri, you're going to have to show him." Well, no matter how it started, the slogan and the reputation stuck. It's not hard to imagine the Apostle Thomas as hailing from Missouri. Thomas was not one to accept the assumptions or proclamations of others. He processed the world and his own faith according to his own experiences and no one else's. He's not going to believe something just because you or anyone else say it. He has to live it out and figure it out for himself. Leading up to today's reading, Jesus was executed, killed on a cross. Nicodemus and Joseph took the body down from the cross and carried it to Joseph's new tomb. They wrapped it in cloth and 100 pounds of spice. These things they all knew, and they believed them because they had lived them, including Thomas. But then the story starts getting a little weird. We do remember back before his death, Jesus had told them that he would die and then come back from death, but they probably assumed he must have been speaking metaphorically. But now, Mary, Peter, and the other disciple all saw the empty tomb with their own eyes. Then a risen Jesus appeared to Mary and told her who he was. She ran to tell the others. So that very day, they've just seen for themselves that the tomb was empty, and they've just been told by Mary that he is alive. We might expect them to be out telling everyone the good news, right? Well, no. They're holed up together in a room with the doors bolted and the shades drawn, hiding from the Jews in fear. Maybe they didn't believe Mary. After all, she was a woman. Christ certainly wouldn't appear first to a woman, would he? Suddenly, Jesus was there, in the locked room, showing them his bloody hands and his side, saying, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." Then he breathes the Holy Spirit on them, reminds them to forgive others, and then, as mysteriously as he appeared, he is gone. Thomas hadn't been hiding with them when Jesus appeared. Was he out scouting the landscape or possibly getting supplies? Maybe he just wasn't as scared as the rest. No matter why he wasn't there to see Jesus for himself, he wasn't about to take others' word for what happened. He needed to see and touch and smell and taste this resurrected Jesus for himself. Otherwise, it would never be real. Thomas was ahead of his time. You see, according to current researchers of religion, he fits to a T the mold of today's people, of our postmodern, post-Christian mindset. Primary values of people today are personal experience, a journey of discovery, and doubt. Today's generations and those for the foreseeable future are filled with people unwilling to accept at face value what they read about God and what they read about life, and even what they are told. They must see it, hear it, and experience it for themselves in order to believe. And once they have a belief, they don't necessarily hold on to it from that point on, but rather they are on a journey of discovery where each new experience leads to a new realization and a new belief. The spiritual lives of people today are fluid, and rather than following tradition or dogma, their beliefs flow like a river in the directions that the land and the nature and the spirit take them. And along with that, a core value of people today is doubt. So if we want people today to connect with the church and to connect with believers, and in turn to connect with God, we can't attack doubt as something that must be vanquished. Rather, we must acknowledge and embrace the doubt that is inherent to all true faith. Doubt is a prerequisite in order for faith to exist. If you remember a sermon I preached back in January, I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again. When we know something for certain, we don't need to believe it or to be convinced, because it's just a fact. It just is. There's no faith required there. You can't have faith in facts, because then it's no longer faith. It's certainty. Faith can only be held in things that can't be proven. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, things that cannot be seen. So whether we like it or not, doubt plays a central role in our faith. The nature and magnitude of that doubt, and then our response to it, those are what will determine whether or not we can still maintain faith in God in concert with our doubts. The possible origins of our doubts about God are endless. A few that I'll name here: a moral injury, an experience of religious rejection, honest intellectual inquiry, or a disappointment about something you were sure that God had called you to, but others don't seem to recognize it. Some people have doubt or reject faith in God because they suffer a moral injury that they just can't heal from. That is to say, they experience something so awful and so against their moral code that they can't get past it. For example, when a soldier kills someone after being taught since childhood, "Thou shalt not kill." Military journalist David Wood described in an interview he held with Steve Dundas, a Navy commander and chaplain. Dundas, a conservative Republican to the core, was assigned to Western Iraq in 2007, where he held worship services and counseled troubled young soldiers and Marines in this hostile territory. Dundas had thought of himself as hardened to human pain, untouchable by trauma. But this was devastating. Young Americans gruesomely injured or dying, villages and towns turned to rubble, streams of refugees, the few who ventured out to the market or mosque, risking being maimed by suicide bombs. And by that time, the rationale for the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq had been exposed, Dundas realized, as a fabrication. It all struck him like a physical blow. I felt lied to, and I felt those lies cost too many American lives and far too much destruction. Up until that point, he said, he had always believed that the government would do the right thing, that the country's leaders would tell the truth, that the nation would ask its military volunteers to do only what's right. Now he was left with the awful knowledge that he distrusted all of them. What's worse, he felt all claimed to be Christian. And I didn't see anyone in the churches, at least the type of church I was in at the time, questioning anything. And I wondered where God was. And I began to wonder where God was in my life. And for almost 2 years, I was an agnostic, just hoping that maybe God would show up again. A fellow naval officer once asked him, "So where do chaplains go for help?" I said, "Right now, I don't know." But he went to see a therapist who was the first one to ask, "So how are you with the big guy?" At this point, Dundas replied, "I don't even know if there is a big guy." Dundas did again find his faith, but only with new experiences and only after being honest about his own doubts and only by hearing and sharing others' stories. Beyond a moral injury, doubts about God can come from being rejected by people claiming to be God's people. For example, if I were gay and I were rejected by my family, I don't know how I could still believe that unconditional love is possible. And if I had been told by my church that God could not love me for who I am, I don't know how I could still have faith in that God. Or perhaps one's doubts come from just not being able to accept all the fantastic and unreasonable stories that we find in the Bible. I mean, for a rational, intelligent, critically minded person, there's a whole lot to swallow in there. So much so it begs the question, can we have faith in something that we don't completely believe? Perhaps an instructive lesson is the dilemma of needing to have faith in peace in the Middle East, despite all evidence that it's impossible. We must have faith that peace is possible in order for it to actually be possible, even if we don't really believe that it is. For many years, Leslie Hazleton reported on the Middle East from Jerusalem. She says, "I am painfully aware of how absurd I sound when I say that I have faith that peace between Israel and Palestine is possible. Anyone who merely scans the news has to see that this is at best naive, at worst downright delusional. And I have no option but to agree, because I cannot say that I actually believe that such a peace is possible. In fact, I'd have to say that based on everything I know, I believe it to be impossible. Yet I insist, nonetheless, on its possibility. I refuse to call closure on hope, not blind, delusional hope, but conscious hope against the odds. The kind of hope that allows me to speak, to act, to not cave in to the stone wall of the impossible. And that, I believe, can only be called an act of faith." Remember Victor Hugo's hunchback, Quasimodo, who was named for this very day? He loved the beautiful and kind Esmeralda, but she told him that she could never love one as hideous in appearance as him. Indeed, she was put to death, never having loved him back. Despite all reason, he continued to have faith in their love. He threw himself next to her body in the grave and lay there until he died. 18 months later, they opened the tomb to find their skeletons intertwined. When they tried to separate them, the bones crumbled to dust, forever mixed together. As Hugo wrote, "The blinder the passion, the more tenacious it is. Never is it stronger than when it is most unreasonable." Finally, our doubt can come from believing that God has called us to something, but then becoming discouraged when that calling is difficult or others don't seem to recognize it. I know this kind of doubt because I've lived it. There was a time when I had a keen sense of calling in a particular direction, but then others didn't seem to recognize in me what I thought I saw in myself. So in the face of that disappointment, doubt creeps in. Did I really understand that sense of calling correctly? Was the calling really from God? Am I good enough? Does God even care? Thomas calls out to Jesus, "Show me. Show me your hands. Show me your side. I need to touch them in order to believe." Jesus doesn't reject Thomas for his doubt. Jesus doesn't condemn Thomas for his doubt. Instead, Jesus appears beside him and invites him to touch the wounds. He invites Thomas into his story in spite of his doubt, or perhaps specifically because of it. "As the Father has sent me, so send I you." The world is calling out to us. Tell me your stories of faith. Tell me about your journeys of discovery. Tell me about your faith. Be honest. Be vulnerable. Don't gloss over the hard parts. Join with me in my times of doubt and fears. Listen to me when I tell you about those doubts and fears. Listen to me when I tell you about my journey of discovery. Listen to me about my faith. Don't condemn me. Don't reject me. The world is calling out to us, show me. Show me that you love me. Show me that your faith affects how you live. Show me how to love as Christ loved. Show me. Show me. Show me. We call out to Christ, show me your ways. And he invites us to touch. He invites us in. The world calls out to us, show me how to love as Christ loved. So what is our response? What do we do? Perhaps God is calling you here to this church, to be here with the rest of us as we consider our response to the world's call. I'll be at the front to welcome you.